Hi, everybody, and welcome back to this podcast, A Catholic's Perspective, the podcast all about being a young Catholic surviving in a secular world. Today, I have a special guest with us. We have Jimmy Akins. He is an internationally known speaker and author. He is a senior apologist at Catholic Answers, and he has more than 30 years of experience defending and explaining the faith. You can catch him weekly on Catholic Answers live show, or you can go and check out his own podcast, Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. Welcome, Jimmy. Thank you for being here.
Howdy, my pleasure.
Yeah, I'm so excited because I feel like, especially in today's day and age, you would think having the internet means that people have more experience defending the faith, but it's actually kind of made it a little bit more difficult for lay people to defend the faith, especially with so many heresies out there. I mean, if you spend 5 minutes on Twitter, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And so I guess kind of diving right in here, what's your experience with defending the faith and especially in the online world, and how can we be better at that?
I've had a lot of experience defending the faith in a variety of different venues, including online. I actually got started before we had the online world. I started work as an apologist or defender of the faith professionally in 1993, and the internet really didn't come in for a year or two after that. So back in the day, it was all by letters and stuff like that. People would write letters, often handwritten letters, which made it even harder to respond. But then the internet came in, and I remember, one day I'd been used to doing research the old fashioned way before the internet, where you'd go down to a library
Mm.
and look up books and magazine articles and stuff like that. And I remember one day I realized instead of first thinking, oh, I should go to the library, I thought, I should just go to the computer on my desk. I've got the world's greatest research library sitting right there on my desk. And so I kind of lived through the transition into the online realm. And it's taken on a lot of diversity. That's one of the big things that's different now than pre internet. What is that today, everyone in the world pretty much is wired. And so you have a much greater diversity of views
Mm.
than you would encounter before. Before, you typically knew the views of the people that lived in your area. So if you grew up in one particular area and a particular church or group of churches or synagogues or whatever was common in your area, you know how to interact with those people. But once the internet really came in, the marketplace of ideas exploded in diversity to where you could be talking to someone in a far flung part of the world who has a background completely different than yours and looks at things in a completely different way. And so these days, it is much more complex for people to defend their faith because they're interacting with people from so many different points of view.
Yeah, I've noticed that a lot as well. I mentioned Twitter earlier where you log on and not only do you probably see a thousand heresies in 5 minutes, but you see people trying to defend it and you defend the faith, not defend the heresy. And I feel like there is an
Well, unless you're a
art.
heretic, then you want to defend the heresy.
True.
Mhm.
Exactly. And I feel like there is an art to defending the faith that's kind of lost.
Mhm.
There's no longer this type of conversation that goes back and forth, and especially on Twitter specifically, because there's a
Mhm.
limited amount of words you can use. So you end up cutting out a lot of conversational words like well or so, or words that would convey a certain emotion that you don't get online. And because of
Mhm.
that, it's like convert to Catholicism. It's like all these hot takes, but it's like we're never going to change people's minds by just throwing hot takes at them.
Mhm.
People don't work that way. I feel like you really need to form a connection with them. And what's one of the ways we can kind of start forming connections online with people who are genuinely, just trying to learn about the faith, but are definitely led astray?
Well, there are different ways of approaching it. Now, in the case of Twitter, there are, or X as they call it these days, there
Right.
are some limitations. You mentioned one of them, which is the character count. You've got to be super concise, and that means you've got to drop out things that you would otherwise say. So that's one limitation. But another limitation with Twitter or X is that it's text based,
Mm,
and so text does not carry the vocal inflections that conversation does. And so if you're talking to someone with your real voice, you can communicate with your voice that you're being friendly, that you're not attacking them, that you're trying to understand. And that doesn't come across on Twitter. When you just have the bare words, people will read you as having a tone that you didn't mean to take.
yeah.
And so you have to be extra aware of that. And if you're going to be using a text based medium, whether for communication, whether it's Twitter or Facebook or something else, you have to bear in mind how it's going to come across to the other person in a more conscious way than if you're just talking to someone. If you're just talking to someone, you can be natural. You can use vocal inflection to communicate your intent and your emotions. But if you're in text, you have to think consciously about how is this going to come across? How could this be taken the wrong way?
Mm,
And then you need to adjust what you say to take that into account. So part of how you communicate with someone is going to depend on the medium through which you're talking to them. That's one of the reasons that even though I'm present on Facebook and Twitter and so forth, I tend not to do heavy apologetics there.
mm,
I tend to do heavier apologetics like on radio or on YouTube. I do lots of stuff. I have, you know, videos coming out every day on YouTube because I can do so much more with them. I don't have the same limitations in terms of length, and I don't have the same limitation in terms of presentation style. I can talk and people can hear my voice and look at my face and see that I'm trying to be a nice guy. One of the things that's very very important to me is charity,
mm,
because frankly, love is God's highest priority. Not only are we told in the New Testament that God is love, we're also told that the two greatest commandments are love of God and love of neighbor. And that means love is the thing that God is most interested in from us. And so being loving to other people in apologetics is extraordinarily important. And it's easier, it's not impossible, but it's easier to communicate that love through video and audio compared to text.
mm.
So if you're going to be using a text-based medium, you really have to think carefully about how can I approach this person in a loving way, and especially if it's something like Twitter or Facebook, how can I approach them in a concise way? And so that means I tend to do most of my apologetics in formats that don't have those limitations, but I will still do them. You know, people will ask me questions and I'll give them basic answers and things like that. But I don't go in for the long, lengthy back and forth where there's a million posts in each thread, you know. Yeah.
For sure. And I think it's nice because in a video, you're kind of like what we're doing right now, having a
Mm-hmm.
conversation online.
Mm-hmm.
And granted, you can't interrupt a video and be like, "Excuse me, like, what about this?" But they can always call in or email you or
Mm-hmm.
something, and
Do a follow up.
they know exactly how you're trying to present your argument, and like you said, love is one of the most important things, and on places like with all these texts and stuff, people wonder why it's so different from all the relationship issues they have over text. It's like because there's no like communication, there's no tone of voice, there's no facial expressions because people always have complained, "Oh, once text messaging became a thing, like relationships became more, complicated because people would always assume the worst in others." And I'm like, well, there's a problem in itself.
Mm-hmm.
Well, like in its own way. But prudence really isn't practiced online in the same way, being careful about how you're saying something, taking it from another person's perspective. And yes, granted, you can't always determine how somebody's going to take something, but if you try your best to really, avoid those hot takes, avoid, the things that are probably going to get you the most likes and the most
Mm-hmm.
comments and attention, which seems to be another huge issue online with, defending the
Clickbait.
faith, is
Mm-hmm.
people like to just Catholics specifically, certain Catholics, And I think, I mean, we're all kind of guilty of this in one way or another when we're trying to evangelize because we lose patience. And we kind of just, we're just like, just be Catholic, just do this, you know? And it's something that'll get us a lot of likes, a lot of shares, a lot of engagement, but it doesn't actually do what the purpose of evangelizing is supposed to do, which is bring people into the faith. I actually feel like it more or less hardens hearts when we
Hmm.
do that. And so when it comes down to evangelizing, not everybody's able to have a platform to be able to reach out to people, but they can do it in their own little circles, you
Hmm.
know? And I feel like that's where it's really missed. People go on the internet and they're like, "Oh, I'm gonna convert people online." And I'm like, "But what about the people in your own life? You
Hmm.
know, what about your mom who's very anti-Catholic, or your dad who fell away from the faith, or your coworker who, says she's Christian, but, doesn't really practice anything that makes her look Christian? What about those people and evangelizing to those people?" Could you talk about a little bit how
Hmm.
we can reach out to those people in our lives, the closest ones to us, especially those that are like hostile to the faith?
Yeah. So offline evangelization with folks, especially those who are close to us, has some advantages in that they know us and they hear us talking to them and they can see our facial expressions. We can even give them a hug, and things like that. They can see us doing other acts of kindness for
Mhm,
them. And we are around them in other contexts where it's not, we're just here to discuss religion. We're here to do other things too, and we can bring religion into it, and so those are some advantages to evangelizing those who are close to us in the offline world. But there's another problem, though, with that form of evangelization. There's an additional challenge, which Jesus himself mentions in the Gospels. One of the things that is noted in the Gospels is that Jesus, he traveled all over Galilee, he traveled all over Judea, he even went outside a little bit, and he did major miracles in a whole bunch of different places, but not in Nazareth. And
mhm,
we're told that he couldn't do many great miracles in Nazareth except lay his hands on a few sick people and stuff like that because they didn't have faith. And Jesus encapsulated this by saying that a prophet hath no honor in his own country and his own family. And so, if that's true not just of him as a prophet, it's true of us as evangelists. Because if let's say you're evangelizing your parents, well, your parents are thinking secretly in the back of their heads, I changed your diapers. Who are you to tell me anything?
true.
Or if you're evangelizing your brothers and sisters, it's like, I remember when you stole my toy, and you can be snotty when you want to be. And so who are you to be all holy and pious and tell me stuff? So there's also a saying that the British have: no man is a hero to his own valet. Your valet is the person who takes care of you and stuff like that. He's kind of like your personal butler.
Mm,
Well, that means he knows you really well, including all your flaws. And so, even though we have additional opportunities with offline, up close personal evangelization, we also have a challenge. And so we need to remember that challenge. We need to remember that even though we're really excited about something and we really want to talk about it, we got to be extra careful in how we do that with those who are closest to us, because they do know about our flaws, they do have a history with us, and that means that it's a little different. We're not the incoming expert from outside. Oh, you're just you. And so we got to be careful about that. We got to take that into account.
yeah, I never even really thought about it that way because I always thought about, when people evangelize to their family, it's like, oh, it's so nice because it's like they know you so well. And then it's like, oh, they know you so well.
Mhm.
And that's something that I don't think a lot of people realize when they start. I have so many young girls and boys who email me saying they want to convert, they want to come back into the faith
Mhm.
or something, but their parents aren't practicing, their parents are anti-Catholic, and they're just like, how can I get them to change their minds? And I'm like, sometimes you can't. Like,
Mhm.
you can't force somebody to change their perspective on something that they're not ready to change their perspective on.
Right.
And everybody's kind of on their own journey, and very few people, especially online, I feel, are actually searching for truth.
Mhm.
because the people, it's just kind of like how the Catholics drop the hot takes. The non Catholics will also drop hot takes about Catholicism, and
Yep.
then the Catholics fall for the trap, and then it's just this back and forth of bickering, but no real fruit is being produced from the conversations. And so when it comes down to it, it's like looking for the people who are genuinely interested in the faith and
Mhm.
willing to listen to you. I feel like is a lot more difficult in a family setting for sure.
Mhm.
But I feel like, when it comes down to it, if you don't push it on them, if you're not trying to be holier or try and be like, oh, well, I'm Catholic and you're not.
Mhm.
So because I feel like we fall into that too when we have family members because we know their flaws. And so we're like, well, did you know this is a sin? And this is the vice of pride, or, that's rooted in this. And we don't really take the time to look at ourselves and be like, okay, what am I doing? Remove the log from our own eyes, so
Mhm.
to speak. And I think that can be really difficult for young Catholics trying to learn about
Mhm.
apologies,
Apologetics.
apologetics. Thank you.
Mhm.
All these terms.
Mhm.
And I was wondering, do you have any specific place for these people to start learning about the faith? Maybe they're not Catholic, maybe they are Catholic, but they're poorly catechized.
Mhm.
Any great resources that they could kind of dip into?
Yeah, the Catechism of the Catholic Church. If anyone wants to do apologetics seriously, there are two major works that I recommend they read in their entirety: the Catechism of the Catholic Church and the Bible. If you read those two books, you're going to have a really great foundation in apologetics. There are also additional books that I'd recommend, some of which I've written. I wrote a book because the church fathers are important to our faith. So I wrote a book called The Fathers Know Best, which is a title for the title is a play on words from an old school TV show called Father Knows Best,
I love
which
that.
was a comedy because Father never knew best on that show. But anyway, I wrote this book, and it's a collection of excerpts from the church fathers gathered by topic. So you could look up what did they say about the Eucharist. It's all in one place, and they're in chronological order. So you can look at what the earliest fathers said, and then slightly later fathers and slightly later ones, and you can track their views through history, and it shows continuity between modern Catholic teaching and what the early Christians were saying. And so that's a very useful book for apologetics. Another one that I wrote is called A Daily Defense, and this is a 365-day book. Although, because I love you, I threw in 366 for leap year. Each day has a different challenge, either to faith in general, or to the Christian faith, or to the Catholic understanding of the Christian faith. And then in just a page, I explain in a concise way, here's how you can respond to that challenge. And so, since it covers a whole year, it has between 300 and 400 different challenges to the
Wow.
faith. And that's also a good starting point for learning apologetics.
No, those are great. And I know especially with there's so many resources out there today. These will really help it kind of narrow down for my viewers and listeners because they're always asking me, what books, what books, what books? And I'm
Mhm.
like, I don't know. I mean, here's a bunch from Catholic Answers and here's a bunch from this one. And then it's like, but to have it actually narrowed down is very helpful. So what are, when we kind of go into the apologetic side of things, and we're really trying to kind of flex that muscle to
Mhm.
teach people about the faith. But also, I think it's a learning experience for us too when we try and do apologetics. You've
Mhm.
been doing this for over 30 years, and there is so much to learn about the faith. I don't think we could exhaust it in our lifetime
Mhm.
with the amount of information that's out there. But what have been some of your experiences, the difficult ones, but also the kind of more easy experiences with online evangelizing with apologetics? What's like one of the most difficult topics you've had to discuss and break down?
Who I'd have to think about that. The more technical the topic is, the harder it is to break down.
Mm,
And so one of the things that's very important to me in my work is clarity and being able to talk in a way that folks understand. Back when I had a revolutionary moment when I was back in in college. I was a philosophy major, and so that means I'm trained in symbolic logic and all kinds of fancy stuff. And philosophy, like any field, has its own jargon, and you show you're an insider by using the jargon and the impressive $10 words and stuff. Like perseverance is something different in philosophy than perseverance is in real life.
Wow, fancy.
Yeah. Well, so I had a girlfriend, and I wanted to show her a good side of myself. I wanted to show her I'm smart. And so I was using all these $10 words around her. And she, at one point, said to me, in all sincerity, "Do you think I'm stupid?" And it's like, no, that is the opposite of what I was trying to communicate. I didn't want to, I was mortified. It just,
Mhm.
oh man, I was so horrified that I had given her that impression, because that was the opposite of what I wanted to do. And I changed as a result of that. I said, I'm no more of this. I'm putting a priority on being understandable. And so
Mm,
sometimes I think consciously about, even if I'm reading something that's really academic and really technical and stuff, it's like, how could I explain this in a normal way so that a normal person would understand it? And I see sometimes apologists, especially beginner apologists, but it can be older ones too, trying to impress people with words and technicality and stuff like that. And that's not at all impressive to me. What's impressive to me is if you can state the faith accurately but simply.
mm,
And so that's one piece of advice I'd have for folks, is think about, how can I be accurate so I'm not dumbing it down, I'm not fudging it. How can I be accurate but simple? Another thing that I can share with folks is talk about what you're interested in. This is something that I do. For example, I do it on my podcast, Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. We look at mysterious subjects because they're interesting, and we cover historical mysteries and scientific mysteries, paranormal mysteries, religious mysteries, and we look at each one through the lenses of faith and reason. We say, what would reason tell us about this mystery? And what would the Christian faith, especially the Catholic understanding, tell us about this mystery? And I try to be super open minded and consider all perspectives. But what I'm doing is a form of soft evangelization. It's sort of come for the mysteries, stay for the Christian faith. And because I'm not pushy about the Christian faith, we just say, okay, so what would the Christian faith say about this? And then we'll talk about that a little bit. Um, but notice what I'm not doing. What a bunch of influencers do is they spend all their time criticizing other
mhm.
people, and that gets views.
It
I know
does.
I'd grow my channel much more quickly if I just started criticizing people, but that's not loving. And that feeds tribalism, and that doesn't build bridges, and it doesn't make it easy for people to convert. If they, oh, this is this hostile tribe, I don't think I want to join them.
Yeah.
You want people to join your tribe, you need to be winning and persuasive, not hostile. So the it's fundamentally not spiritually healthy, either for the influencer or for the person's audience, if it's all just criticism and
Mm,
looking down on other people. And so I cut in a very different direction. I talk about stuff I'm enthusiastic about. It's like, this is cool. Here's something interesting to think about. And so, one of the things that I would recommend folks do is to have that winning approach, is not just criticize, but when
mm,
you discover something and it's cool and it's fun and it's neat and you want to think about it, share that. And people will catch your enthusiasm, and they'll see you're being positive and open, and not just running other people down. And so, having that positive, open, let's talk about this. This is cool. What do you think? That's a really successful way I've found to help introduce uh, faith related topics to folks, and even not non-faith related topics, but to introduce topics in general to folks in a way that gets them on your side, where they're sharing in that joy of discovery and intrigue and thinking about stuff. And so just talking about what you're enthusiastic about rather than criticizing people is, I think, a key to engagement.
Absolutely. I mean, the amount of criticism that I see online from big content creators, I'm guilty of it too. I am
Mhm.
not putting myself on a pedestal there. I've been guilty of it too in the past. I was young,
Oh,
trying to figure out,
same thing with me when I was young. I was feeling my oats, to use an old phrase, and I could be a jerk. And
yeah.
over the course of time, Jesus has helped me be less of a jerk.
And
And
that's the key, Jesus.
mhm,
Because I feel like a lot of times these people, they really focus their content and their mystery on themselves, and that's where they really start losing the actual, like, it almost becomes a shell, like they are a shell of the faith, but Jesus is not in the shell where he should be. Instead, they
mhm,
are. And that can be a huge reason why people end up going basically off the deep end
mhm,
and starting all these really extreme criticisms, whether it's about non-Catholics or the Pope or other Catholic content creators too. I mean, when you start criticizing one person or one group of people, it doesn't just stop there. When you
mhm,
realize the views get raked in,
mhm,
and joy is contagious. And that is something that I have found in my own little group, is
mhm,
that when you are excited, like you said, or joyful about something, and joy doesn't always mean, that we're happy. Happiness
mhm,
and joy don't mean the same thing. Joy
mhm,
is like a deep rooted sense of, you know, not happiness, but like joy
mhm,
and peace, that even in the midst of the worst trials, we are still joyful because we have Christ.
mhm,
And I feel like a lot of the times, we're missing that online. It's all of this like hollow kind of banter back and forth. But when I see people criticizing, Protestants or this or Catholics that are like coming, I do believe that some things do need to be called out, like
mhm,
in a loving manner, of course. But when I see it consistent by like one person or this, and it becomes like a trend because they realize it gets them views or likes, I start realizing I'm like, non-Catholics are going to view Catholics in this way.
mhm,
Like, we represent the church. We are the ones who kind of, show people how the church is. And if we are constantly attacking and ridiculing, no wonder people think the church is rigid and the church has all these rules and we have to like, and obviously we do have rules for a reason to keep us safe, but rules are freeing.
mhm,
It's kind of like the rails on a bridge. It's like, so your car doesn't go over the edge.
mhm,
And it's interesting to me because whenever I see it, I don't just see someone like defending the faith, I see them actually pushing someone away from the faith.
mhm,
And I'm like, how much more fruitful would this be if you took this from online and you put it in a DM, or you were like, hey, I know you have a lot of questions about the faith, and I saw that you were posting these things which aren't completely correct, and I'd love to discuss that with you, instead of dragging them publicly through the mud
mhm,
on Twitter. And granted, there are going to be some what do we call them, trolls or whatever on
mhm,
social media that literally just want content and they're not Catholic, and they just, Pearl Davis is one I can think of. But the main thing being is that we are trying to reach out to them on a personal level. And
mhm,
it's not like this. I almost think of it as in like being in the Roman Colosseums, and they're just like, you said this. And it's like this big spectatorship on online, because thousands and thousands of people see those types of
mhm.
things. And
You're
what would
actually
you go ahead?
articulating a principle that Jesus talks about in Matthew 18, where he
Oh.
says, if someone sins against you, talk to him privately. And if he listens, great. If he doesn't listen, then bring a couple of other people. And if he doesn't listen to them, then you can take it to the church. But what he's doing is suggesting dealing with a problem on the lowest level in the way that saves the most face for the person
Mm.
who's causing the problem. And you're essentially recommending the same thing. So that's a good biblical principle.
Thank you. Hey man, I know I read the Bible, and sometimes it's crazy how the more you study the faith, the more it actually does change your view of things, whether you realize it or not. That's a great
Mhm.
example of that. I mean, I knew about that parable, but you don't think, or story, but you
Principle.
don't
Yeah.
think about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't
Uh,
really think about it.
if I can give you a couple of extra tips that are related to
Yes.
that. So back when I was in college, in grad school, this is a little later than the previous college story I told. I was a philosophy teacher, and so I would teach introduction to philosophy. And one of the sections I would have in my intro course was philosophy of religion,
Hmm.
where I'd talk about God and things like that. And but I was teaching in a state school, and so I'm not supposed to, endorse religion in a state school. It's okay to
Yeah.
talk about it, but it's not okay to push it. And so I developed a technique, actually a set of techniques, but I developed a technique for being able to engage in religious discussions in a way that didn't put people on the spot.
Hmm.
So, for example, let's say I'm talking about an argument for the existence of God, and a student raises an objection and says, "Well, what about this?" Well, I could say, you're wrong because, and give my view of why they're wrong. But what I decided to do instead was take myself out of the picture.
Oh.
And so what I would do instead is say, that's a very interesting objection. What would you say? So instead of saying you're wrong because X, I would say, well, that's a very interesting objection. What would you say to someone who replied by saying X? And so I could get exactly the same content into the
Oh.
discussion, but it's not coming from me. I've got an imaginary interlocutor. And so I'm not putting the person against me. We're not having a fight. I'm just wondering, what would you say to this third person? And there are other ways to do that too, where you take yourself out of it. Instead of saying, let's say you're on Twitter and someone says Bible verse X means Y, and you could say, you're wrong because it means Z. Or you could say, no, well, from a Catholic perspective, Bible verse X would mean Z rather than Y. And notice now you're not talking about yourself, you're talking about the Catholic perspective.
Mm.
And so you're offering another perspective. You're not telling someone they're wrong. Now, and so those are some ways by taking yourself out of the discussion you can continue the discussion. You're just reframing it so it's not one person against another. Instead, it's we're just interacting with your views and looking at what someone else might say to them.
That's perfect, because I definitely think a lot of the times we take things so personally,
Mm-hmm.
and it actually destroys not just our own mental health and being able to let things bounce off of us that happen to us online, but also, like you said, it kind of creates this war between people. And now, all of a sudden, not only does this non Catholic not like Catholicism, but they don't like Catholicism because of you,
Mm-hmm.
because of your personality, your attitude, the way that you are conveying Catholicism to them, instead of kind of being on that, neutral kind of
Mm-hmm.
field and being like, well, here, and just like offering it, just being like, well, the Catholic Church does this. And it's not that whole, well, you're wrong and like this is why and you're going to hell. And the amount of times that I've seen the whole you're going to hell thing if you don't convert to Catholicism, I'm like, guys, what
Yeah,
are we doing? Scare tactics? Like
and that
our parents tried that on us. Like that didn't work clearly.
yeah, it's also anybody plays that game. When I put a video out on YouTube, and if it has distinctly Catholic content in it, people are going to come on and say, "Oh, you Catholics are going to hell."
Yep.
Well, that doesn't persuade me. And if you do it to other folks, that's not going to persuade them either.
Hmm.
And that leads kind of to another point that's helpful in online evangelization, which is don't don't sweat over the comments box. Don't sweat over the replies that people give you. Lots of people are out there. They may interact with your content briefly. They may just see the thumbnail and want to comment and don't even watch the video or
True.
don't even read the comment, but they want to spout off, and they will. And if you allow yourself to get concerned about every response that people make, it's going to be an enormous time suck, and you're going to be much less effective because you're going to be wasting all your time responding to people who really aren't that engaged. And
True.
or if they are engaged, they're obsessive, and that's going to be its own time suck. So I tread lightly with responses. One of the rules that I have frequently that I frequently employ is I ask myself, is this person asking me a direct question?
Hmm.
And if they are, that'll increase the chance that I'll respond because they're actually asking me for something. They're asking for information. If they're not, well, then I don't have any inclination to respond because I've got other things I got to do. So, and sometimes I try to read the comments. I don't read every comment, but I try to read the current ones. But if someone's just hostile, I typically don't engage with them. I will now. I've mentioned charity, and that's an important part of this. I will sometimes use a little light humor
Hmm.
to. I try to do it in an understated way. For example, back in the 1960s, it was the Cold War, and the premier of the Soviet Union was Nikita Khrushchev. And he came over to the West and he made a speech at the United Nations. But while he was at the United Nations, another person who happened to be the British ambassador was making a speech, and Khrushchev takes off his shoe and starts pounding on the table with it. And it's like everyone he's just has this an incredible undiplomatic public display of temper,
Yeah.
and so everyone is kind of shocked. And since the British ambassador is the guy talking right now, it's up to him to figure out how to respond. And he has this very understated, British can be very understated in their humor. He says, I'm sorry, I'm waiting for the translation on that, which cracked everybody up and diffused the moment. So, he responded to this, intense display with understated humor. And when someone's being a super jerk, I will sometimes do that.
Hmm.
Like I had a guy in a comment the other day who said, you know, uh, why do you believe in purgatory? I will prove that you're an idiot. Tell me where in the Bible you find purgatory, and then I will embarrass you. And so, where does the Bible mention purgatory was the essence of it. So, what I did was I took his exact comment, I copied it, I pasted it into a reply, and then I changed the word purgatory to Bible because the concept of the Bible is not mentioned in the Bible. If you
Correct.
do a word search in an electronic Bible for the word Bible, it will not show up in any verse
Yeah.
because the concept of Bible is post-biblical. And he's criticizing purgatory for being a concept that was articulated after the Bible. Now, it's got biblical principles behind it, just like the Bible has biblical principles behind it, but both of them were formulated in the post biblical age. And so what I did was I took his exact comment, about I'll expose you as a fool and stuff like that, and just put the word Bible there. And everyone who read that could see that's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to be cruel to this guy. I'm just using a little bit of light humor by bouncing his claim right back at him. And so I will sometimes use light humor to respond, but I never get mad because A, it's not going to do any good. B, anger is a painful emotion. And C, why would I want to get angry?
Yeah.
So it's just, okay, well, if you want to take that viewpoint, you can take that viewpoint, but you're not going to get a rise out of me.
Yeah, I think that's the most common thing that I see is just the anger that's online. And I'm just
Mm-hmm.
like, this isn't of Christ. Like Jesus, like there's righteous anger, of
Mm-hmm.
course. And
Yeah.
and we know about that, but it's like a comment online about something like what you're saying, like that would be enough to rile up anybody on Twitter. And it's like, it's not worth it. Like, it's really not worth it. I mean, the amount of times that I don't even check my comment section
Mm-hmm.
just because
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna have some of those interesting people in my comments. But
And
like I said,
that's actually a healthy response, not always checking your comments. That,
oh,
I mean, I try to, but if you know that it's going to just be
Yeah.
something that angers you or demotivates you or is going to be a massive waste of time, then it's better to tread lightly with the
Yeah.
comments.
Especially with my pro-life content, that because
Hmm.
it's such a hot button topic right
Yeah.
now, no matter what I post, if it's pro-life, if I say, abortion is murder and I link things, or, no matter what it is, it's like I know my pro-life posts are going to get the most hate. And
Hmm.
so that's why those ones I'm like, I'm not even going to check. Like
Hmm.
it's fine. But also it's like I feel like people who are chronically online doing apologetics, like in an unhealthy manner, where it's like they're chronically online because they're constantly checking the comments, or they're constantly trying to refute anti-Catholics who are clearly not interested in actually learning about the faith. It's like that wears somebody down,
Hmm.
and honestly it creates a lot of footholds for Satan to kind of come in, because the amount of vices that are online that we're constantly exposed to, first of all, is really extreme, because there's pride, there's gluttony, because we're consuming so much content, and people don't realize social media could be a form of gluttony if you're just mindlessly scrolling or constantly on it.
Hmm.
And then of course pride, our wall goes up because we don't while we understand there's another person on the other side of that phone, we don't physically see them. So we feel more confident in saying whatever we want to say. Um,
I call
it's,
that the glass screen effect
yes.
because I noticed it as if you ever watch two kids and they've got a sliding glass door between them, they will be taunting each other because
Oh.
they've got that glass between them. And I noticed the same thing happened when I was I used to be a full-time pro-life activist. I would stand out in front of abortion clinics holding a sign, and I would notice people driving past, and they would be flipping me off and shouting and doing all kinds of stuff that they would never do if they were standing next to me. But
Mm,
because they've got that distance, because they've got that glass screen in front of them, it creates an emotional distance where they're not thinking of me the way that, as a human, the way they would if they were standing next to me.
interesting.
And then when online came around, I noticed the same thing online.
Mm,
Whenever there's a glass screen between two people, whether it's a sliding door or a windshield or a computer screen, people's behavior goes way down, and their anger, their rudeness level goes way up.
yeah. And that's something that is interesting you mentioned, because now that I think about it, I just did a pro-life thing recently, and
Mm-hmm.
cars were driving by and they were waving at us and
Mm-hmm.
honking and everything. But then, of course, you'd have the occasional person flip you off or whatever. But I noticed this one girl, she was walking from a bus stop that was nearby, and she had her
Mm-hmm.
water bottle and everything. And I noticed she had like some pro-choice stickers on her water bottle. She was filming us, but
Mm-hmm.
she was like keeping her distance. Like
Mm-hmm.
she refused to like come up directly to us. We all waved and said hello, and she would be like, "Hello,"
Mm-hmm.
but she was filming us, and you could tell like she was trying to hide it by her bottle, but you can
Mm-hmm.
tell. And I always just thought, I'm like, interesting. If we just had more in-person conversations, and now I'm not saying that every single pro-life conversation you're going to have is that calm, because,
Mm-hmm.
well, it wasn't really a conversation, but we've seen the videos from Charlie Kirk and Kristen Hawk and all these people who are in the pro-life movement who have addressed very hostile people
Mm-hmm.
in the pro-life movement.
I've been
But
shot at.
yeah. Wait, really?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Oh.
I was once shot at when I was standing out in front of the abortion clinic, and there was another occasion where I was standing out in front of the abortion clinic, and I see this pickup truck coming,
Mm.
and it's going really slow,
Oh.
and it starts to creep up one wheel onto the sidewalk, and I see the guy reaching out his hand, and I'm thinking, am I about to get shot in the face? Well, he pulls up and he stops and he hands me a grape soda because he saw I was standing out in the sun and he
The
just
heart
wanted to be nice. So it can go both ways.
can never be too careful though.
No.
Grape soda, gun. I mean,
Yeah.
that's really difficult too, because I've had those thoughts while standing out there. I'm like, would there actually be somebody that hostile?
Hmm.
And the truth is, yes, absolutely. I mean, the amount of pro-lifers that, I mean, our clinics have been bombed, are they've been destroyed and broken into. people have been beat up. I mean, it's hostile, but it makes sense for the side that the pro-choicers are on. It's a
Hmm.
side of violence. It's a side of, you know, extreme like murder. So it
Well,
makes sense.
there's a congruity there, but both sides can be violent,
True. Very
and
true.
I just in defense of now I'm 100% pro-life, but a lot of pro-choice people would say I just don't think that a human. I think you're a human. I don't think an unborn baby is a human. So I think it's okay to kill that, but I wouldn't think it's okay to kill you because I
Mm.
recognize you're a human.
Yes. I think that's a really good point, and it kind of pulls us into the whole, like, apologetics and, like,
Mhm.
defending the faith thing too,
Yeah.
because the same thing goes. You have to look at it from the other person's perspective and realize not like, that gunman is not all pro-choicers.
Right.
And I think that's the really difficult part in almost any difficult situation that you is just like not everybody is going to be super hostile, but
Hmm.
not everybody's going to be super into the faith.
Hmm.
It's like it's like a hour by hour basis or a person by person basis where you have to assess that situation with that person that's in front of you
Hmm.
or that person that you're trying to evangelize to and decide through prudence and virtue, is this a fruitful conversation? Is this not? How can I best help them? And take into account not just the platform you're on or if you're in person, but also their mental state,
Hmm.
what what religion they come from, and maybe learning about their religion
Hmm.
so that you can then come back and be able to be like, oh, I understand your religion, because not that it would necessarily give the other person more, reason to learn about Catholicism, but it shows that you respect them and that
Yeah.
you're willing to learn.
Yeah. And this leads to one of the most important things, I think, for doing apologetics and evangelization, which is asking questions.
Yes.
And so, like, if you go to the doctor and you want some help with a problem from the doctor, the first thing the doctor's going to do is ask you a bunch of questions
Mhm.
because that's what enables him to diagnose what's going on with you and then find an appropriate treatment. What you don't want the doctor to do is you just mention a symptom or two and he assumes, a whole bunch of stuff that isn't really relevant to you. And we have the same phenomenon in apologetics and evangelization, where you may know, for example, someone's a Protestant,
Mhm.
therefore they must not believe in the real presence.
Right.
Wait a minute. Lots of Protestants believe in the real presence. Anglicans do, Lutherans do, Methodists do. Lots of Protestants believe in the real presence. Or someone's a Protestant, therefore they must not believe in infant baptism. Well, wait a minute. Anglicans do, Lutherans do, Methodists do, Presbyterians do. So you can't just lump people into groups. And even if you've identified a smaller group, like let's say someone's a Lutheran. Okay, well, Lutherans believe in the real presence. Good. But how do you know this Lutheran does?
Right.
This Lutheran might be an outlier. And so even if you do go study someone's religion, which you should do, when you come back to that person, you don't want to just say, "Oh, I read about your religion and therefore I'm competent to speak on it now." You want to find out what does this person believe? Because
Mhm.
they're not let's say they're a Methodist. Well, the Methodists are not the Borg. They don't all have the same views on everything. And so you want to say, "Oh, I was doing some reading about your religion and this is what I read. Is that what you think?" What's your opinion on this? And that, again, shows you care about the person, you respect their opinions, you're not making assumptions about them, and it puts you on a better course to figure out what you actually need to do to help the person.
Right. No, that's great. And I think especially because so many people are so quick to use the blanket term, Protestant or Catholic, they forget that there are actually a lot of Protestant denominations.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, they all believe something different. Catholics will be like, oh, well, that obviously proves that they're not. And I'm like, calm down. Calm down.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like we're all trying to just bring people to Christ, and to a Protestant, no matter if they're Lutheran or whatever, they believe they're right. They
Mm-hmm.
believe that they're doing something true or helpful or loving by telling us that we're well, maybe not all of them, but telling us that like we're wrong and we're
Mhm.
doing the same thing by doing
Mhm.
that. And so really it's just this cycle of miscommunication and misunderstanding where we're not willing to extend the hand, but they're also not willing. And I mean, sometimes they are, but sometimes their willingness is taken as aggression by Catholics, where it's like they'll
Mhm.
ask a simple question like, oh, why do you guys worship Mary? But Catholics will take that and be like, we don't worship Mary, and like you guys don't even like Martin Luther believed that she was a perpetual virgin, and like just start fact throwing at
Mhm.
people. And I mean, Protestants are guilty of this as well, but being able to be the first one to de escalate the situation,
Mhm.
to extend the hand
Mhm.
to the other person, I feel like that's where it's all really going to start,
Mhm.
in one on one, in person, creating a friendship.
Mhm.
I think that's something that we're lacking too. People just automatically see strangers quote something and then they drag them through the mud. There's no foundation of friendship, or how does this person know you actually love them or want what's best for them? You've only dragged them through the mud.
Mhm. There's also, this is related to another concept that's important in apologetics, and that's turn taking. One of the things that I sometimes see apologists do, because if you do apologetics in a substantial way, you do a lot of study, and you'll encounter a bunch of arguments for things. And arguments are of different quality. Some are really good, some are okay, some are pretty good, but not as good. Some are okay, and some are not that good. Well, there is a tendency that some people do in apologetics have, including some professionals, to do a core information dump on people
Yeah.
whenever a question gets asked. So like, why should I believe in doctrine X? Well, let me give you 100 reasons why you should believe in doctrine X. Okay, that's always a mistake because it wastes people's time. Nobody is going to sit through 100 reasons,
No.
and 100 reasons are not your 100 reasons are not all going to be of good quality. So what you want to do is you want to, number one, you want to bulletproof your apologetics. That's how I refer to it. You want to remove all of the weak stuff and just focus on the strong stuff. So because the strong stuff is your best stuff. So why wouldn't you want to put attention on that? Why bother with the weak stuff? So you want that also reduces the amount of material you're going to present to a manageable level. But in general, in conversation, like if I'm having a conversation with someone on Twitter or X, and they want to know, well, why should I believe this? Well, I'll give them a reason or two, but only a reason or two, and I'm going to give them my best reason or two. But I may know 100 reasons. I may know 20 reasons that are really good, but giving them 20 reasons right now is not going to be helpful. I'll give them one
Mhm.
or two. And then if they want more, they can ask for more and I can go further. And I may even say, there's more to say on this, but here are a couple of reasons. But by doing it this way, I don't waste my time by giving them a bunch of stuff they're not interested in. I don't waste their time by giving them a bunch of stuff they're not interested in. And the conversation proceeds in a more human way where
Mhm.
people take turns in conversation and you see if the person wants more, and if you do, then you give them more, but you don't force it on them.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's really important too because a lot of Catholics will use it as like a flex almost, like,
Mm-hmm.
"Look how much I know," but in reality, they're just, like, copying, pasting from like, Catholic Answers or something, like,
Yeah.
I've done that. I've
Mm-hmm.
also, like, directed people towards Catholic Answers. I'm like, "Just
Mm-hmm.
there's, like, tens of thousands of websites about this specific." She's fine. A ton of, like she just dropped a big pan. Um, but the thing is also some people will be like, "Oh, just read all of these articles," and they'll send them like 10 articles. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like, why don't you just, if you know the faith and you know that these articles are good, why don't you just summarize them and send them maybe one, maybe two that are
Mm-hmm.
like actually about this and don't kind of dive into like all of this crazy history that, yes, it's important to know, but maybe they aren't ready for just
Mm-hmm.
yet. Because a lot of times they're like, look how much I know, and they're like flexing. But in reality, humility is really what I feel like gets people to want to listen to you. If they
Mm-hmm.
know that you're humble and it's like you're not trying to prove a point, you're just trying to minister to them and their needs in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And they're more likely to come back to you with a question if they have it later on. Too many people think that evangelizing isn't a long game. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like evangelization, in my experience, has been a very long game.
Mm-hmm.
Where when I first started this ministry, I knew a girl and she was telling me about how she wanted to join the Catholic faith. And I'm like, that's great. You know, I want to 100% support you in that. And she just joined like a couple months ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, and it's been since 2019, so it's
Mm-hmm.
like it's been a few years, and I'm like, but that's the beauty of it, is it's
Mm-hmm.
like you get to see these people grow in the faith, and you get to see these conversions. And I
This
think, go ahead.
this brings up another really important point, which is serving God, whether it's in evangelization or catechesis or apologetics or however it is a long game. But the
Mhm.
mind blowing part is it's longer than me. Because
Yeah.
what
Mhm.
happens is people will get involved in a situation where they think, "Oh, I've got to convert this person. You know, they're showing some interest, or they're, you know, it's all on me to find the right words to help this person." And it's like, and the truth is, no, it ain't, because God made you. He brought you into this person's life. He can bring other people into this person's life. All you need to do is do the right thing for you to do at this moment. But
Mhm.
do not take on the responsibility for another person's soul, because it doesn't come down to you. God loves this person way more than you do. And God has infinite means of reaching this person and helping this person out. You want to play your part. You definitely want to do that, but you don't want to exaggerate your part and think that it all depends on you, whether this person converts or gets saved or whatever. Um, what happens when you do that is you burn out. And
Yeah.
so this is a way of Satan tricking people into taking on more responsibility than God has given them. And then they get frustrated as a result of all the excess responsibility they've taken on, and they burn out and they're less effective in the long run. So it's better to realize God has a million ways to reach this person. I'm with this person now. I'll do my little bit to help, but I'm not going to take on more than that.
Yeah.
And that way you don't burden yourself with burdens God didn't mean you to carry, and you don't burn out in the same way, and you're more effective in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a huge issue we see today. And it's something that I've experienced and I've had to kind of alter throughout the ministry's kind of life of 4 years. And it's something where now I feel like a lot of the time I have a good balance, and it's something that I see so many other people online trying to evangelize don't have. And I'm like, your life will be so much easier
Mm-hmm.
when you get this balance and you have this healthy relationship with not just apologetics, but also just social media.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes people make apologetics their entire world. And it's like, if it's your job, great, you know? Or if it's like something you're specifically called to, but not everybody's called to it.
Right. Well, and it is my job, but I need outlets. I
Yeah.
need stuff to do besides apologetics. That's one reason I do Mysterious World, is it gives me opportunities to think about and study stuff other than just religion every moment of the day. I teach dance classes. I teach like five different. I teach square dance, contra dance, English country dance, Morris dance, and community
That's
dance.
awesome.
Yeah. So I have activities that are completely different because everybody needs something different to do.
True.
And so if you find yourself just stuck on one thing, cultivate some new hobbies. It'll help
Yeah.
you in the long run.
No, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jimmy, for coming on here and discussing. I think this is going to be a huge hit, especially with so many people evangelizing these days.
Mhm.
Where can my listeners find you?
Well, I work for Catholic Answers, so they can go to Catholic.com, which is a very easy web address to remember because it was the 1990s and we thought ahead.
There you go.
They can also go to my personal website, which is JimmyAkin.com, All you got to do to get there is spell my name correctly. Jimmy is Jimmy. Akin is exactly like it sounds. Just four letters. Akin. There are no E's, T's, or S's in my name. Just
I feel like this has been a thing.
Akin. Yeah. And you can also check out. I'm on actually a bunch of different podcasts, but Mysterious World is at mysterious.fm, and also go to my YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/Jimmy Akin, where I have videos coming out every single day.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jimmy. I really appreciate it. And I hope to have you back on sometime.
Sounds great.
Awesome. And with all of that being said, guys, I hope you enjoyed this podcast episode and you learned something. And I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Bye.